I'm gonna get started, and I guess people will just like hop in, and then we are gonna end up with a couple of analyses of projects at the end of this. As you might know, this is hosted by one of the user groups run by the Icon ecosystem that is like a working group, basically. So there's some things to discuss, and then in this one, I want to also address the idea of like doing a economic project analysis, and we've got a couple of teams from the ecosystem that have volunteered projects to be reviewed. This is the first time that we've done something like this, so I've chosen projects that I think were at least moderately successful, and I would like for us to basically focus on giving like constructive feedback. I know sometimes there's a lot of tension about the like public funding sources, but this is like steps towards making that process more efficient for everybody. So anyway, let's get into the meeting. You can check out the agenda, which should be posted on the announcement in the Dev Announcements channel. This will show you the two project analysis templates that we'll be using. Just going to go over the rest of the agenda real quick. We're also going to be discussing the protocol upgrade proposals for the CPS, which whatever we discuss here is going to factor into what becomes the next contracted developments of the CPS, which contracted developments of the CPS product are done by the Venture 23, formerly known as the IBRIS team. And there's a couple of different things to discuss there. Mandatory progress report sections, payment per milestone instead of payment per month, and domain-specific funding buckets. This I'm going to tie it into an idea that was suggested by TJ, was like last week or 2 weeks ago, which was not just domain-specific, but also the idea of like venture versus public good funding buckets. So we'll give that some attention. But I know that this is going to be probably the least popular thing to do, and in my opinion, the most important thing to do. So I'm going to bring us through this process first. This is called a weighted decision matrix. Can you guys see this spreadsheet right here?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. This is a pretty common tool in economic analysis. It's a way to like approach the idea of game theory, sort of like Nash equilibriums and all that, in order to understand what is the best decision to make. This is something that you would find from like a professional group doing case studies on projects, and like a venture capital group might use something like this in order to figure out which projects are going to be best to fund for their funding pool. And the specific reason that I picked the weighted decision matrix is it's like a fairly complex analysis, but it is like fairly simple to do. You basically go through a couple of different criteria for a product, figure out like how important are each of those criteria, and then give a score 1 through 5 to the different projects that you're doing the comparative analysis to. At the end of it, you multiply the score for the product by the weight of that criteria, and then you end up with a total score. And then whichever product gets the better total score, there's some like consensus idea that that product might be slightly better than the other one. And what this might be useful for is if you've got to do like a post-mortem on a project and you want to see like how did it perform based off of what we expected, you can understand like what went through during the development cycle. And then also you can use this information for future like or proposed projects to know based off of like things like the performance of the team, which might factor into like feasibility and time frame and innovation, versus like the amount of funds available and the amount of funds requested, which is cost or impact on the environment, which I put that in here as, relatively important. It's kind of like a null point for a lot of things, but anyway, point is all of these criteria have some amount of importance, and you can understand things like which project to fund and which projects performed well based on our expectations. So at the end of this meeting, we're going to publish this project comparative analysis in the CPS, like the the sustainability user group, and that should tell us a little bit about what we think of these products. All right. And then we've also got, which we might not get all the way through, a case study, which you can perform on a single product to do a bit more in-depth analysis about what more specifically did you find as a success, a failure, a challenge, and a solution for the product. And again, that's going to help you think about the team and think about the product and think about the ecosystem. So getting started, we're going to be performing a comparative analysis on the Karma Finance versus the Node Butler tools. There should be some amount of open discussion with this, but if there's not too much, we can probably get through it relatively quickly. So just like, if we can we allow people to talk, Arush or John?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm able to unmute and talk whenever. I don't know if that's just me.
The echo's from Arush. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody who wants to provide something to the discussion to unmute, and I'll moderate a bit of a discussion about the analysis of these products. And I know that you guys are going to be more familiar with them than I am, so it would be helpful to get some input. So let's just get started going down this list. The criteria are impact on the environment, feasibility of the project, cost of the project, time frame of the project, and innovation of the project. And we're just going to start with Karma Finance on the idea of impact on the environment. And basically, for a distributed project, which isn't hosting servers, you can almost straight away give both of these projects like a, or you know what? Why don't we switch this to impact on the ecosystem? Impact on the ecosystem. So Karma Finance, anyone have opinions about the impact on the ecosystem of Karma Finance, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst? Otherwise, I will give you my opinion. And then we can pull up the Karma Finance proposal just to get a little more context.
I'd say just from a high level, ideally, there'd be more people using it, but in terms of what the CPS scope was and what the project was supposed to be, I think it made the impact that it was intended to make.
Okay, so give me a number that 1 through 5 you would associate with it.
1 through 5, 5 being the best.
5 is the best and 1 is the worst, yeah. So this is renting liquidity, to help enable protocols to establish their own protocol-owned liquidity while still providing benefits for the network participants. So what's the reason for saying that this had the impact that it was supposed to?
Because Ohm and Balanced have both used it. So I don't know if you want to say the target market definitely used it.
Gotcha.
If there were a ton of projects on Icon, I would expect there to be more impact, but it's kind of limited by the number of projects that could use something like this. So
the ability of this project would be to allow other projects to establish protocol-owned liquidity. Is that kind of a
yes,
good
and it's
summary?
not just protocol-owned liquidity. To be fair, it's really just a fundraising mechanism, with the primary use being for protocol-owned liquidity. But From team could just sell FRMD for BNUSD at like a floating discount using Karma just to raise money. Just a fundraising mechanism primarily.
Cool. So fundraising mechanism, and it's been useful for the teams in the ecosystem so far, but it's limited by the amount of teams in the ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, if anyone doesn't have any different opinions, I would say we can kind of neglect the fact that it's not that large of an ecosystem and then give it a 5 because it accomplished the goals and it hit its target teams and it's still available for other teams to use. So give it like a second, and then if you just going to throw these in the general chat real quick so you can see which proposals we're looking at. All right, I'm going to move over to the Node Butler tool now. So Node Butler is a tool for managing and monitoring nodes. This is by the EspenIcon team. The, I guess, goal is to allow teams to know what is going on with their node, to use it to do things like debug and call contracts and track status in participation in the network. So I know that the Balance team has used Node Butler a little bit, and I'm not sure what's the rest of the usage of Node Butler. So does anybody have any comments on, like, have you heard of this tool before? Do you think it was useful if you have heard of it? Or what do you think could be like a reason why you didn't hear about it?
Heard about it and used it, but yeah, I'm with Balance. So
okay. Let's see if we can get like at least one more person giving some thoughts here. How about Norsh Kiwi? I'm just going to call you out. Have you heard of Node Butler tool? If you're online to talk. All right. Let's gonna keep going. So Node Butler, impact on the ecosystem. What's up?
Yeah, I have heard of it, mate, but I haven't used it personally myself.
You haven't used it?
No, not myself, no.
Gotcha. Cool. So just from your like very far view opinion, right? This is a tool for managing nodes and stuff. Balance team has used it. They've had some success using it, but it's not super well advertised in the ecosystem. So do you have any thoughts on...
Sorry, I got this confused with the Icon Bridge SDK, but I have used it. Sorry, it's made by the same team member. I just was like thinking in my head about Icon Bridge SDK, and you mentioned Balanced, but Node Butler is not something Balanced would use, but something that I've used personally for managing the Lydia Labs node.
Gotcha. Okay, so Lydia Labs has used it. So I'm going to go back to Norsh Kiwi. Just from your high-level view, given your, even if it's vague knowledge, it's still important to know what you think. Do you think that that tool has had a big impact on the ecosystem? 1 through 5.
I'll be honest and say I'm not sure, mate.
That's okay.
Yeah, if I'll be honest.
So given that the...
asking teams about there, but...
Yeah, given that the criteria is about impact on the ecosystem, you should have heard of it if it had a big impact on the ecosystem. So I'm going to go with maybe 2 on this one. it seems like it's a pretty good tool, but it's not had like a lot of usage, which is important feedback to give. And I've asked Fidel about this, and he's very open to receiving the feedback that we give him. All right, so we're going to move on to feasibility. So feasibility is a criteria that is descriptive of, given the proposal, how much do we feel like it is actually able to be accomplished? Right off the bat, I would say if the project in a post-mortem comparative analysis like was delivered well, meaning like on time and within budget, or close to that, then you can probably give it a high score for feasibility, unless when it initially came out it seemed ridiculous and then there was just like a gargantuan engineering or marketing effort behind it. So feasibility, Karma Finance. I'm gonna call somebody else out. Yassine, give me some opinions.
Actually, I would love to, but I have no knowledge, like not enough information to do on this matter.
All right. So let me give you like a small description of it, and then we'll see if you get like a little bit more context. The Karma Finance tool is like a fairly typical DeFi tool. When it was proposed by the Protocol 7 team, the idea was to bring some sort of a fundraising or a ownership of liquidity mechanism to the Icon ecosystem so that it could be used by projects. This is not like reinventing the wheel. It's also not something that necessarily had been done in the Java like environment on Icon before. So it's not new, but it would be new for the ecosystem. Given that, and it's like a DeFi tool, give me like an idea of what you would imagine the feasibility of something like that to be. 1 through 5. And then just a small explanation.
I'd imagine 4, since it will be unique in the ecosystem, and we don't have like such thing.
All right, so 4. So it's new to the ecosystem. It's not new in general, and you can probably just look up examples for how to do it. All right, cool. Moving on to Node Butler. Yassine, if it's all right, I'm going to ask you to also give an opinion about Node Butler. Node Butler is a monitoring tool. Basically what it is a program that you can run, and you can give it the information about your node so that it can call the blockchain, basically using the API interface, the RPC calls and stuff, to know more about how the node is functioning, like is it up to date, what is the amount of calls that are bonded to it, and then with Node Butler you can also call specific contracts, I believe, from the account address associated with the node. So Node Butler for using a node, basically, and then tracking it.
I think like from a community member perspective, like it isn't that much, but from a programmer or a developer, it would be really helpful, and it would like make his life easier. So yeah, I'd suggest like it is a 5, since it would be really helpful to the developer.
So this specific criteria is about feasibility. Like, do you think it's possible to build a tool like Node Butler? That's the question.
I'm not sure that it is doable. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay. So this is, again, a post-mortem study. In fact, the ESPN team did deliver the tool and delivered it pretty well, and apparently it works pretty well. I haven't used it personally. But based off of your feedback, because this is a group to represent the community's opinion, I'm going to go ahead and suggest we give it a 3 because you're not sure about the feasibility of the Node Butler tool. What is that?
Okay.
Do you think that sounds all right?
Yeah, it seems fair.
Okay. So like, you know, feasible, but really not sure. It sounds like it could be fairly complicated. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Just one more sec. All right. If you feel like I'm muting at some point, that's okay, but I'm going to switch over maybe Elise if you unmute. If you don't want to, that's also okay. Bum-ba-dum. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. And if somebody would like to give their thoughts on the cost of the Karma or Node Butler projects, then feel free to do so. All right. So the Karma project was proposed funding for $60,000, and the rest of the 100,000 is funded by the Protocol 7 team. And this project took 4 months. And I know it also took a little bit extra time, but just based off of the cost of $60,000 for smart contract developers, front-end developers, designer, project manager, community promotion, testing, does that seem fair? I'm gonna go with maybe it's a 4-month project, and that's like seems relatively like fair developer rates. It is a fairly large team for a tool like this in a smallish ecosystem, so I'm gonna give this a 4 and say that it was well scoped, but there are possibly some places where the cost could have gone down. All right, and then I'm gonna move over to the Node Butler tool and do the same thing. So the Node Butler tool was requested for $7,200, and it's developed by one person, and it's 2 months of development, and that's going to be front end and back end, and then server costs for a year. So coming out to 7,200, that's 5 out of 5. That's like probably the best return on investment that you could ask for. Again, feel free to unmute, otherwise I'm just going to keep going. Time frame. So gonna look at the Karma Finance tool and the time frame that it took to produce this tool. This was 4 months, and I know that they went over by like 2 months or something. Given what this is a project by 8 people out of Slovenia, and this is a like fairly good looking front end, you know, fairly usable back end, useful tool. I would say turning around a project in 6 months, given the overtime that I think they took, for a total cost of $60,000 is fairly good. I'm sure you could come up with a prototype in 2 to 3 months for something like this. I would say probably testing is a good reason to spend an extra 2 months on the product, especially if it has to do with finances. So I'm going to also give this a 4, and noting that if you go over by 2 months and your projected amount of time is 4 months, that means you're 50% over time, which is not that good, but the product is fairly robust. All right, and then time frame for Node Butler. So you can kind of see some screenshots here. Node Butler is actually pretty nice that it's integrated with the wallets, but the front end is like fairly straightforward. It's not complicated. It's not very flashy. I'm sure that the back end functions pretty solid and, you know, doesn't have too many apparent bugs in it. I would say 2 months is fair. I believe this came in on time, although we can just check the rest of this proposal. Yeah, so this actually came in ahead of time. This came in 1.5 months from the S-Band Icon team. Again, 5 out of 5 on the delivery. All right. And then the last category is about innovation. Again, feel free to unmute and drop your opinions on this. Maybe Jeremiah, real honest, if you want to give some opinions, unmute yourself.
I can do.
Oh, hey, what's up?
Hey,
Cool.
man,
So
what's up?
not too much. So we're just going through the comparative analysis, and this is the innovation criteria. We're going to start with Karma Finance. Again, I've dropped these CPS links in the general chat, and then we'll go to the Node Butler tool. So give me your thoughts for innovation.
Yeah, 1 to 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. Well, basically, Karma Finance, I would say 4.
And why do you say that?
It's not magic, but it's absolutely great in finance manners. So, I would say 4.
Cool. So just a general idea that it's like pretty decently established, but it's also quite good and it's necessary in a way in the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So then Node Butler.
Yeah, I heard about it, you telling it, explaining it. So basically it gives it's work like a how to say, like interface that shows the monitoring, to monitor nodes. Yeah, I would say the if I say 4 to Karma Finance, I would say 3 for this one.
Okay, cool. So 3 for this and 4 for Karma Finance, and then a 3. What is the like slightly more elaborated version of why it's a 3?
I mean, you know, just Node Butler just take the data and make it visual to make people understand it better. That's why I deducted 1 point. And but if we think it like that, if I give Node Butler 3, then I would have to give 5 to Karma Finance if I think out loud.
So would you like to change it?
Yeah, I would like to change it, yeah.
So Karma Finance to 5, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So anyway, I know this was like a pretty short analysis, but we're gonna do this times this, plus this times this, plus this times this, plus this times this, plus this times this. It equals false somehow. I don't really know how. Oh. 77. So 15 plus 40 is 55, plus 12 is 67, plus 10 is, 77. And then I'm not sure if I can copy this, oops, over here. E3 times, okay, C, 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 see. Pardon me, I'm not that great at Excel. So that got a 67. So the takeaway here is that Karma Finance is a more preferable product than Node Butler. Not by that much, but by at least enough that you should be able to know, like, maybe it's better to fund a tool like Karma Finance in the long run versus Node Butler. So that's that analysis. I'm going to save the case study analyses, and I'm just going to present them in the user group sustainability chat over time, and I'll lead that and just send it out to the community. But the general idea here is, like, we are essentially acting as a grant committee. Everyone who participates and gives opinions on what the CPS does, and the current way that that's being done is like very sort of hand wavy. It's like someone's got an opinion about something and then they give a short statement about it. But as we have seen from the CPS projects, if you go through the proposal history, the hit rate of successful projects is probably somewhere around 15 or 20%. You can probably make arguments more than that, but it's definitely not more than like 40 or 50. And the idea is that even if we just do simple things based off of like community opinion, like we got some opinions from Yassine, and I think that that's awesome. Thank you so much for giving your opinion. But, you know, given that we talked about, I believe it was feasibility, and Yassine was like, well, actually, I don't even know that much about it. Just giving an opinion and then getting like a collective opinion, which is really sort of the goal here, is gonna be a really good tool for understanding which decisions we should make as a group moving forward. So I'm gonna post this later with a little summary of what it was, and then I'm gonna move on for now into the rest of the meeting agenda. So I know this is going a little bit over, so we'll keep the discussions terse a little bit, but this is about protocol upgrades, and we're going to go through 3 basic types of upgrades. The first one is mandatory progress report sections. So if anybody's got opinions about whether the CPS should have the same monthly progress report, or sorry, this is mandatory progress report sections. And this basically means that in the team's analysis of their own project, they currently give a progress report. They are not required to say anything specific. There is a template for what they're supposed to say. Does anybody have thoughts on whether it's valuable or not to include specific sections that must be there? For what we're currently using as the template, we're saying it should be mandatory to have the deliverables accomplished in this past cycle and the deliverables projected for next cycle as mandatory for the development team to report on.
I think that when you say mandatory, like including it in the smart contract logic, I don't think is necessary, but having the text, like the user interface, have specific text boxes or whatever that leads it to be mandatory if you're filling out from the UI, I do think would help in the review process. It would make it a more standard review process.
Okay, cool. So we're going to say that, at least for now, possibly the progress report sections should not be mandatory. And if anybody else has opinions on that, unmute yourself and talk about it.
To be honest, I think that the project should always update and like tell the people what they are building and the progress of their project, because it tell people that they care, and it will give transparency to the project. So I believe,
So what we're discussing now is specific sections of the progress report. The progress report is always mandatory as of current. However, this template, this file, which you can see on my screen share, has like 6 sections to it. The team can delete this entire thing and say whatever they want. The suggestion is, should we make it required to talk about certain things? For example, the 2 that I've suggested from TJ actually are accomplished this cycle deliverables and projected deliverables for the next cycle. Should teams be required to report on that? So you see,
I actually can. Yeah, I also think that it should be necessary to like show specific accomplishments throughout what they had planned. To tell people exactly what they did, not just to be like vague, like progress. I'm sorry I couldn't like open the stream and see it because my Wi-Fi is too slow.
No worries.
But
it's okay.
I'm trying. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the inputs. So I'm going to write for that. Possibly the progress report should not be mandatory, although transparency and specificity is important. In conclusion, it's worth more thought. That's a compilation of your thoughts and Scott's thoughts. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one unless somebody else has comments on the mandatory progress report sections. So this is about payment per milestone instead of payment per month. So this has been proposed a couple of times, and it seems the community feedback is generally that there should be payment per milestone instead of the current functionality of payment per month. And the typical reason that's given for that is because teams are not currently held accountable enough for their delivery in the development of their CPS approved projects. So does anybody have any comments on the payment per milestone versus payment per month?
I would want to say that I agree with that too. I feel like having milestones and something a bit more concrete rather than a time frame sounds a lot smarter for us.
Okay, and for what reason?
I think people care more about things actually getting done rather than getting an update itself. Mm-hmm. So people want to like it actually like hold people to account for getting the things done that they say they're going to get done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, payment per milestone is important, is a good idea because people care more about holding accountable when people get things done.
Yeah, the community wants to see accountability about things actually getting built. Yeah, so if you have it by milestones, it's probably a bit easier for people to see like part 1, part 2 will be done, part 3 will be done.
Gotcha. And not necessarily. So what would be the counter, like what would be the argument against payment per month? Like why is that a bad idea?
I think maybe the concern would be teams would say, yes, we're working on it, we've had problems, we've been delayed, or there's been an issue here or an issue there, we're still working on it, but people want the actual thing to be completed even if there are delays.
Gotcha. So payment per month has shown problems in the past with delivery. And then payment per milestone, again, people want to see delivery even if there are delays.
Yeah.
Eric, real quick, is this being recorded by any chance? Because I got to hop off here, but I want to try to go back and listen to this if it's possible.
Yep, this is being recorded. John's doing the recording. I'm going to put it on the Icon Network YouTube channel. There's I'll send this later, but there's a playlist called Community Meetings, and this will be under that playlist.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Thanks so much.
All right, cheers, man. Thanks for coming. All right. Anyone else have thoughts about payment per milestone versus payment per month? I'm taking notes on this, by the way. What's up?
Yeah, I was going to ask this question, how we can check those milestones are achieved successfully to pay them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the proof of delivery, as you could call it, I guess, is going to be different for every project. The way that I would probably best suggest it done is for a project that's based off of like media or an events, you send the like event ticket, like photos of the event, some videos of what happened, and like a summary of what happened, which is essentially like how the progress report structure might work. For projects that are based off of software delivery, the way that I would do it, depending on the product, obviously, but for the most part, this would be like open projects that are able to be seen. You want to see at least a demo of the running version of the project. You want to have proof that the project is reproducible. So what that would require is if you're a team that's voting, to have some reliable way to understand whether that project like is able to be run, which either means like the CPS user group sustainability could have a person that is basically contacting the development teams and going through the like project runtime process to make sure that the startup steps work, or like having somebody who goes on the app itself and then says like, okay, this app is actually working. So basically what I'm getting at is like, you need to see a demo, a screenshot or walkthrough, and for due diligence purposes, you want to know like that the actual interaction process works. And that doesn't necessarily have to be conducted by the team that's voting. You can, as a voter, delegate that responsibility to somebody else that you trust that might have more time to do something like that. But yeah, basically, it's like a little bit of a diligent process by you because, of course, it's an open voting system and you're always allowed to cheat in your vote.
Yeah, sounds fair. Thank you.
Actually, I have some. Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
For an interruption.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying that for each CPS fund there should be a sponsor. So why not like have this sponsor to be inside this project and always like track the progress and be like with the team that is building. So ensure that they are working.
So the sponsor is the one that checks up on the project, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that keeps up with them, with all the details, to then share them with the rest of the representatives and the community, of course.
Okay, so I'm going to go with a follow-up on that. Follow-up, how do we incentivize or penalize the sponsor to ensure that they follow up?
So just on that note, the sponsor has to post. The sponsor has to post a 10% bond, so they have to essentially fund 10% of the budget up front. So if the project fails or is rejected, the progress reports aren't satisfactory to the rest of the team, then the sponsor loses the bond. That's currently how it works.
Okay. That is currently how it works.
Yes, on mainnet every round.
Okay, cool. So currently, they post a 10% bond and lose it if the progress report or the project does not pass voting. All right, cool. So yeah, basically just like we would need to figure out the best way to like make that social notion more popular of like getting the sponsor to check up on the project, because that is currently not mandatory and is another thing that like is easy to cheat. I would suggest possibly it could be a mandatory report by the sponsor.
I mean, having said that, yeah, overall, I don't see why that would be. I think it would be less efficient that way. I'm just telling you what I would do if I was the sponsor of a project and this was somehow either social consensus or somehow engineered to be mandatory. I would tell the sponsor team to send me their progress report, and then I would copy and paste it in.
Well, it would.
And all
I'm
that
just
does is
saying,
add
like,
another layer of administration effort, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I understand. I don't want to put too much bureaucracy or administration into it. The suggestion is a mandatory report on the deliverables, not on the progress. So it would be like, can you demonstrate that the app is working or something? But
Exactly.
so it couldn't be copied and pasted because it has different like information in it. Like the one of them, you don't ever need to have a deliverable progress report as the team to ensure that your project is working, currently at least. So that was kind of the idea, but I agree it might not be a good idea to add too much administration. All right. Any more thoughts? Payment per milestone, payment per time, month. No? All right.
I'll just say that I strongly support payment by milestone rather than payment by month as a change to the CPS.
Okay. All right. So seems like most people agree with that. And then last topic, domain-specific funding buckets. I have some suggestions that's written of having one for open technology, having one for media, having one for general. DJ also suggested that we have one for like venture funding, meaning like projects that are supposed to accrue profit, and then one for like public good projects, which are sort of more in line with like what happens now, where it's based off of like infrastructure and tooling and education and stuff. So I'm gonna kind of open it up, or one more thing about the open funding buckets is there's a possibility that the buckets accrue funds over different periods of time. Meaning currently the funds are accrued and released on a monthly basis for the monthly inflation from the network. However, one of the suggestions is that if we have a bucket that's like, let's say this is the venture technology bucket or something, maybe the funds accrue every 6 months, and then we have potentially a larger amount of funds, depending on the percentage, or like a more reasonable amount of funds, at least, in that bucket to, fund projects that may be of a larger scope. Just as an example, for the categories that I suggested, open technology might receive 15% over and accrue every 6 months, or release every 6 months. A media fund bucket might accrue 15% and release every 4 months. And then a general bucket might accrue every 70% and continue to release every 1 month. And what that amounts to is, for something like open technology, you get like, whatever we have currently, which is what it last month was like 132,000. What was it, BNUSD or ICX? I don't remember. But anyway, if it's like 100,000 ICX, then you get 15% of that, and then over 6 months it becomes 95,000 ICX. And the media bucket is 15% over 4 months, which would become 60,000 ICX. It's just kind of based off of like, what do you think is the appropriate scope of a project to fund, and how frequently do you need to fund it? So any thoughts on funding buckets for specific domains, whether that's like technology, media general, or whether that's like nonprofit and profit?
My initial thought is that this is not really a practical issue right now, for two reasons. One, the CPS itself has very little funding, so further chopping that up into budgets and smaller buckets isn't really practical right now. Doesn't warrant much attention, so very low priority for that reason. And on top of that, I think like the other issue about CPS governance in general and how it's managed needs to be solved first before this becomes practical. So whether it becomes a predetermined committee or fully decentralized, like no decisions or advancements can really be made on this topic until the other two are solved first. It needs to have more money and better governance controls before this matters.
Okay.
I have to agree with Benny regarding to dividing the bucket into smaller pockets, especially in these times. But I also have to disagree regarding putting it all in one bucket, because if we take CPS as an investment, we need to diversify our investment into several types, like into building technology, into projects, into media, as mentioned. So I think we need to diversify, but it is not like a must right now, because we don't have a lot of money at CPS.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't have budgets for different things, but budgets aren't relevant when there's when the governance structure itself has issues and there's not very much money.
Yeah, so I made a note to discuss further CPS governance. Should we change to a committee base instead of a validator base, or something else? So that is going to be on the agenda for the next time. I want to continue getting thoughts on the funding bucket idea, because again, this is going to influence the next contracted cycle of development for the CPS product.
I would say no to buckets then, if it's going to be
so
whether or not it's involved
then.
in the next contract.
Yeah, I've got that noted. I wrote funding buckets might not be practical because CPS does not have a lot of funding. And then from Yassine, although diversifying investments is useful, and it may be useful to do so deliberately, but maybe not right now in this market.
Can you also just add to the note about the governance structure itself should be a higher priority, in my reasoning?
Yeah, this should be a high priority to discuss. All right. Does anybody have thoughts on the idea of domain-specific funding buckets? This is the last thing that we're going to be talking about in this meeting, and then I'll update you on how this affects the developments of the CPS in the next month until we have the next meeting. And by the way, like, even if you're not a voter or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. Just give your opinions here. It's all important.
I just want to say that I pretty much agree with what's already been said. Originally, or earlier on, when we had the icon incentive scoring system, we talked about having a DApp booster funding pool and an ecosystem expansion pool. So there was sort of like defined as two separate things, but then it all kind of got mashed together when the CPS was made instead. I remember seeing a lot of feedback from people saying that they liked the idea that they could see that there was a pool of funding that was going to be going towards the apps themselves. So in the future, when we have more funding, I definitely think it would be better to have like clearly defined buckets. But yeah, I agree with what Scott was saying, or what Benny was saying about getting other things sorted first.
Okay. So in the market that we have more funding, it would be good to have funds allocated to DApp booster, boosting or incubation.
He was referring to something from before you were involved there, from like early, even like 2018, 2019 of
Yeah.
we used to call the
Years ago.
IISS in 3 categories. There's the DAP booster program, the ecosystem expansion project at EEP, DBP, and then there was like delegating your votes to nodes. So there's like 3 ways to earn rewards.
Yeah, I get that it was an old system, but I think the sentiment is still valid. It's
Yeah,
kind
no,
of the
I
same
agree. Just
sentiment
in
that
terms of
PJ was
like a
talking about.
booster program, he was like
Yeah,
referencing something specific from a while ago.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that input. All right. So that's the funding bucket thing. Any last thoughts? Things that you might want to discuss next time, things that we should have paid more attention to, or just like, keep it civil, obviously, but kind of talk for a minute if you've got something else to say.
If there's time, I would like to mention regarding the ventures, since I'm building, or I want to build a game using Unreal Engines. So there is a contract that says that after reaching 1 million in revenue, you have to pay them 5%. So I think that we should do similar things to projects that take fund from CPS, and for example, they are a game, they are on finance or anything like finance things that can get revenue. After reaching a certain point, that there should be a tax or something that gets back to the CPS.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do that if we required KYC and physical document signing and enforcement of laws within the United States to apply to the CPS. But right now it's decentralized and anonymous. So if somebody agrees to that and then just doesn't do it, there's nothing that can be done right now. And I do think a lot of people in the space value anonymity to an extent and open permissionless systems. But I also would be open to a more formal grant program with KYC requirements, anti-money laundering policies, and strict enforceable contracts by law. If that's something you're suggesting.
Okay.
Is it possible if we insert a smart contract? Would it work, for example, or is it?
No, you can't, because they could just deploy a new smart contract anonymously and take all their code from the one that gives 5%. There's a ton, just without getting into the details, there would be a ton of ways to circumvent that type of agreement in an anonymous system.
Okay.
And the reason that Unreal can do that to you is because you sign up with your name and email and address and your own personal credit card, and they know a ton of stuff about you. So if you break that agreement, they can sue you.
Exactly. That is true.
Yeah.
So, cool. I wrote, just for final notes, if there were a KYC agreements for funding, it may be good to have revenue percentages go back to the CPS if the project is a certain amount of successful. So that's kind of a long off goal. It's yeah. But, worth noting.
Yeah, another thing, we were discussing this last week. Is it possible, I'm just brainstorming, is it possible to create a structure many projects leave icon after they are getting funded by CPS? Can we do force these projects, how to say, these projects are mainly developing a blockchain code. This is the technology. So what if CPS owns the code, and then maybe if the projects leave, it's basically an open code. Other developers can, other developers may be having an opportunity to get advantage of it, maybe develop it and improve it. Like that.
So I'm going to write, should code be owned by CPS in some cases, because currently some projects leave after being funded and there's nothing left, even if they were delivered.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not sure if it is practicable. Sorry.
Practical.
Yeah, practical. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Do you have thoughts on that, Scott?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but I would say it's not practical for a couple of reasons. For one, just from the early days of Icon and the early days of the quote layer one wars, exclusivity agreements typically work to your disadvantage. You would like Icon wanted a lot of teams to, if we're going to fund you and work with you, promote you, you got to be exclusive to Icon. That's not an attractive offer. It inhibits the team. So, they need to do what's best for their business. And if you're forced to build in one place, then that's bad for the team's business. They're equity holders. And then on the other side, having the code owned by somebody else is also fairly not typical in the industry. Everything is usually open source. Even balanced code, if someone in the Icon community wanted to fork balanced, all of our contracts are open source. Same with pretty much every project we've discussed here. Everything is already open source. So the goal that you wanted of someone to be able to pick up the project, that already exists. It's just a matter of interest and whether or not people want to pick up the project.
Okay. So, do you have any more thoughts on that? I don't know your real name, but Icon is Penguin.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, no problem.
So, noting open source is a good medium and maybe worth, how do you say,
Encouraging
looking
it.
to generate more interest in the open source producibles or deliverables in open source for continued development. All right. Anyone else got thoughts? Just final thoughts?
Final thoughts would just be to reiterate that I think, revising and improving the decision-making policy, who has the decision-making power, there's like the higher level governance structure is probably the top priority of the CPS in the short term.
Okay. That
Or
is a
should be
good
the top
point.
priority.
Yeah, definitely worth noting. I, to some extent, agree with that, and I think that there's probably a lot of other people in the community that agree with that in some way as well.
There's a Naval quote that I really like. Like, if you want to make the wrong decision, ask everyone. So I think, trying to figure out how to make the best possible decisions for the CPS funding should be a top priority on that note.
About like putting it to a more deliberate committee instead of just all of the validators.
Yeah, that would be like my suggestion. Yeah, exactly. And maybe veto power by a decentralized community. Like I don't want to get too much into like my specific ideas.
No. It's on the agenda to discuss further.
Yeah.
So the next time we have this meeting,
Yeah.
I'll
Exactly.
have some ideas for you of like what a possible committee structure could look like. But for now,
there's a lot
I've noticed
exists out there.
and I think there's enough people that agree with you that it's worth more discussion. Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Cool. Thanks, guys. This was again, like, it's not a super sexy meeting, and I'm not really intending for it to be. I want this to be like an actual useful thing that we come out of it with a greater insight into like what's the state of the CPS and how should we develop it, including the projects that are being funded. So I'm gonna post that analysis that I did, and then as I develop the like case study analyses for the individual projects for Karma Finance and Node Butler, I'm gonna post those as well, and then suggest that we like either get more feedback on that or, sort of, I'm going to work towards normalizing doing those things as a part of the process of making funding decisions. But yeah, thank you for coming and talking, and I hope you got something out of it.